What's up, everyone, and welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, November 20th. I cannot believe that. And we are live, and apparently you can also kind of hear my dog. So welcome into everyone that is tuning in. Say hi in the chat. We are live on Player Profiler's Twitter, YouTube, and then on my TikTok as well. So welcome in, guys. Drop your questions. I'll be answering them throughout the show. And we're also going to have a main topic, as always. I try to have a main topic. Sometimes I don't stay on topic. But the main topic of today's show will be tight ends on the rise, not the top options, right? We don't need to question the rise of guys like Brock Bowers, who is just incredible, right? We don't need to talk about the top tier tight ends. We are talking about those guys, those streaming options, or those options that we just don't quite know if we can trust. I think you guys know who I'm talking about here. Mr. Boom Bust. How much are we trusting it? Taysom Hill and some other tight ends as well. I wrote an article on this subject. You can find it on my Yahoo Writers page for more information after the live, of course. Before we dive in, though, happy pre-Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving is on Thursday. We're live on Wednesday, so I guess we'll have a show next Wednesday, provided there's no conflicting issues there. But yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I love Thanksgiving. It's my favorite holiday in the world, aside from like the football aspect of it, right? Because you love a holiday where you can just sit back and watch endless football all day long. I love the food. I love Thanksgiving food. I will eat Thanksgiving food literally any time of year. Stuffing, fried turkey, of course. I don't know how to fry a turkey. That is the conundrum of me not being in South Carolina where my family is, and Houston now is where I am. And I don't know personally how to fry a turkey, so that always leaves me in a weird spot. But yay. Thanksgiving food is so wonderful. It's my happy place. Dropping the questions before I get to the topic of tight end, since I see them already flowing in. I'm just going to go ahead and dive in and right off the top start taking some questions here, because we're going into the playoffs, and I know that everybody is trying to make that final push, and these are critical decisions here. From JJ, I'm trying to ship off Josh Downs and JMO. Who should I try and get? That's a tricky one because those are two guys that I feel like people are genuinely skeptical on, and they shouldn't be, right? Because Josh Downs says that's less about Josh Downs and more about the skepticism around Anthony Richardson. And then, but he's been such a solid addition to this Indianapolis offense. So I think he's worthy of getting value as a wide receiver too. Then Jameson Williams to me is another clear wide receiver too with strong upside. It's just a matter of people really trusting him. So if I'm you and I'm looking at this, and from my perspective, these are two guys that I value as two wide receiver twos. A fair offer would probably be to try and trade for a low end wide receiver one. So maybe try and target a DK Metcalf. If someone's feeling a little bit skeptical, Courtland Sutton is an interesting one that I feel like people are kind of on the fence about in terms of really buying into him and Bo Nix. So maybe Courtland Sutton is another one of good value that you could lean towards. That would be an upgrade from both of those, in my opinion, in terms of steady reliability and a good quarterback situation. Also, one thing to note, Denver's rest of season schedule set up for Courtland Sutton and Bo Nix. I love it. So those are two guys that I do really love right now. Let me stop talking about Bo Nix, though, because I've talked about him every single week, and I'm starting to sound like a stan. I may have done a video on him this week. I may have written a portion of an article on him this week. I know I talked about him on the Yahoo live show last Sunday, and I did a video on him. I need to stop. Oh, thank you for the gifts, Chris. Really appreciate it. All right, guys, as a reminder, as I'm taking these questions, we are live all over the place. Waddle, Elijah Moore, or Alec Pierce on waivers. Alec Pierce on waivers. Who do I start? Yeah. Waddle it's difficult to trust him. to be honest, right? The upside hasn't been there. You automatically want to lean into him. Oddly enough, the person who is probably the more reliable, stable floor in this grouping is probably Elijah Moore. Alec Pierce is very boom bust. That connection with Anthony Richardson is real. But at the same time, I still wouldn't start Alec Pierce over Jalen Waddle. So it's between Jalen Waddle and Elijah Moore. I do have Jalen Waddle higher. I know it is painful right now. It really is. But the good news here is that this could be a beneficial matchup for them. I don't hate this matchup against New England's defense. They have been struggling over the course of the season to get pressure on the quarterback, obviously, because they're dealing with a lot of injuries. That bodes very well for Tua. Tua's going to have plenty of time. More time he has, the more likelihood of him being able to hit Jalen Waddle. So I would take my chances in this matchup with Waddle. Tyrone Tracy, rookie of the year. You know, if he had started from the beginning and he was on a team that was a less hot mess, there would be a legitimate shot for that, in my opinion. But unfortunately, God, you made me say Bo Nix again. I think Bo Nix is kind of that dark horse right now for rookie of the year offensively. Keep your eye on it. I have not looked at I'd be curious what the what the betting lines are at right now on that. I'd be really curious because you can probably still get a bargain. I have not looked in a while. More questions here. McConkey or Waddle? I would definitely start McConkey over Waddle. We were just talking about Jalen Waddle and how this matchup could bode well for Tua being able to reach him. That said, if you've got a guy like McConkey, I mean, quite frankly, I'm not even questioning it right now. McConkey has moved up in my rankings to wide receiver 19 right now. Love the matchup against Baltimore. So McConkey is absolutely someone, and technically I might be a little bit low on him in consensus just because there are a couple of other players that I like a little bit more, like a Jawan Jennings and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, McConkey is kind of a must start person for me this week, given the matchup for sure. For sure. What do we think of the DeVonta Smith drought? It's kind of the opposite situation of Jalen Waddle. It's not that the Eagles are having issues. It's just that the addition of Saquon Barkley has made DeVonta Smith even more volatile than he was previously, because volatility was kind of always the name of the game there. When him, AJ Brown, and Dallas Goedert were healthy, it was always just kind of a battle between him and Goedert in terms of who was really going to get the second targets right there behind Brown. But at least we felt comfortable starting DeVonta on a weekly basis here. We're not feeling that now just because the volume on the ground has greatly increased. So unfortunately, I think this drought is kind of par for the course of what we're going to see when this entire offense is healthy, for one, and when Saquon Barkley is doing Saquon Barkley things, unfortunately. So yeah, DeVonta has begrudgingly moved further back in my rankings. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for the matchup, he would be moved a lot further back this week. The fact that he is playing that struggling LA Rams secondary in a matchup where both of these teams should really be pushing high volume, that's the only thing that makes me hesitate and completely bailing out on him this week, just the matchup being so good. So yeah, the drought, kind of predictable in my opinion, just because of the health of the entire receiving core of pass catchers there, and the addition of Saquon. But at the end of the day, this is a good matchup. So he's still a low-end wide receiver too, in my opinion. We'll do one more question before we dive into some additional topics. Jared Goff or Jayden Daniels? I do have Jayden Daniels, and I'm going to pause here on this because I talked about this, and it's Jayden Daniels by one spot, by the way. So I do really like Jared Goff in this matchup, although there is something to be said about the fact that, just when you trust Jared Goff in a matchup where in theory it should be a good situation for him to push volume against a bad Indianapolis defense, those are the times where all of a sudden the ground game really takes over, and then Goff has a fine day, right? It's not like he's going to have a bad performance, but maybe he doesn't have to throw the ball, but maybe 20 times, and there's just not a ton of volume to get you there from a fantasy perspective. So beware. This is kind of like he's a clear top 10 tight end or top 10 quarterback for me this week, but there is a scenario where he unfortunately doesn't have that upside. Jayden Daniels in this matchup against Dallas, I do have him as my QB6 overall. I know that it has been disappointing over the past month and a half, really, for him. Very understandable that fantasy managers, given the level of upside that we saw earlier in the season, are disappointed in his recent performance and considering benching him. But I feel like we're a little bit too difficult on Jayden Daniels. There have been some down games, right? The game against Pittsburgh in particular was one where, just sub 10 fantasy point performance last week. Obviously, it was more of a floor game. But prior to that, he had 20 plus point performances in a row. He'd been solid before then as well. He's been kind of hovering around that low end QB1, a lot of QB11 finishes, QB12 finishes for him. So honestly, I think we kind of got disillusioned at the beginning of the season where he was capitalizing on his rushing upside and the good matchup. And he was also healthy, not dealing with the rib injuries. That top 5 upside still exists for him, but really he's more so in that low end QB1, confident section right there. So I don't think by any means we need to panic about Jayden Daniels. And given the matchup that he has this week, I feel a lot more confident in him as well to be able to take advantage of Dallas. And then hopefully after that, maybe have a time period to kind of rest those ribs. Obviously, it's definitely affecting him. We've seen it multiple times with quarterbacks before. I think Josh Allen dealt with ribs before. Justin Herbert notably dealt with ribs that really just, took him down from a fantasy perspective. So we got to give Jayden Daniels a little bit of grace here. I'm still starting him over Goff this week. Before we dive into, let's go ahead and take a quick sponsorship break here. We will hear a word from our sponsors before I dive into the tight end topics more.
Oh, every week I'm answering these start-sit questions on Sunday morning. I go to the weekly rankings on playerprofiler.com just to make sure that my instincts are correct, and sometimes they're not. And guess what? More often than not, I go with the projections. You may not feel great about starting Daniel Jones or Wan'Dale Robinson, but the projections say, hey, that's the move. It may not feel right, but you use those projections to get it right. That's the power of the Player Profiler system. It's Evan Ringler, it's Bradley Stalder, it's Theo Greminger, of course, it's Billy Muzio making these rankings possible. The season rankings, so you know who to pick up, who to trade for. The dynasty rankings are part of this. The offensive line rankings from Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. Then we get our cornerback rankings, which show which corners are matched up with which wide receivers. And now, in collaboration with the IDP show, we have IDP rankings. Did you know that? Did you? So go to playerprofiler.com, use promo code PODFATHER. Get you 25% off the player rankings package right now at playerprofiler.com. Enjoy!
All right, we are back. And again, keep dropping those questions. We will come back to those in just a second. But I do have to kind of sort of talk about the main topic of the show right here. It's tight ends, right? And we want to talk about these guys that are these, I call them the unheralded tight ends, right? They're not our Travis Kelce. They're not our Brock Bowers and our Trey McBride. These guys that we have been streaming and pulling through. In particular, last week, we had quite a few pulled through. We'll start off with the big name brand one, right? Taysom Hill and his nice big boom week there. And the thing with Taysom Hill is that just when we always start to feel comfortable with Taysom Hill as a tight end who's not really a tight end, then he gives us a underwhelming performance. It's not a level of consistency from him. We're not getting those big, massive boom games week after week after week. It comes in spurts, right? And you wonder how much can you trust it. He's still a guy that we're questioning, is he the streaming option that we put in over, over a Dallas Goedert? Do we put him in over, I feel comfortable with saying we put him in over Kyle Pitts. Yeah, we do that, but we still question it for guys that are kind of in that middling area, right? Whether or not we want to lean on the traditional or take the risk with Taysom Hill. The interesting thing about Taysom Hill, and again, you kind of parse through the statistics to kind of, figure out what is going on with him and his floor and the reliability here. We do need to get comfortable with it because his production last week is not something that repeats on a regular basis. But at the same time, we know that he is going to remain a big focal point of this offense, right? Because we have no Chris Olave. We have no Rashid Shaheed. Taysom Hill has stepped up and is making that same level of production on the ground, stealing touchdowns from Alvin Kamara. And at the same time, he is also coming through with some receptions as well. But you still look at him as that boom bust option here. But when you look at his floor, right, which is kind of sitting around tight end 6 is the typical floor when he's not having those boom weeks. His floor is not actually that far off of what it takes to be a borderline tight end 1, right? Only 4. Now, this is kind of destitute when you think about it. Only 4 tight ends right now are averaging more than 10 fantasy points in half PPR. That's frightening, right? And when I say more than, averaging more than 10, technically 3 of those 4 are averaging exactly 10, and George Kittle is the only one that is averaging significantly over 10 fantasy points per game. The position has just unfortunately been kind of flat. And that means that when you're looking at these tight ends and saying, do I want to play Taysom Hill? If a low-end tight end 1 is typically getting you 7 or 8 fantasy points at best on a given week, yeah, I will take the risk every single day of maybe getting 5 fantasy points from Taysom Hill because the upside that he has of everyone else is so much higher. So, when you're looking at Taysom Hill, I feel super comfortable with starting him over a lot of the guys, over the Kyle Pitts, potentially over the Evan Ingrams, right? Because while they're safe options or options that do have some level of upside, at the same time, he is an option that is giving you long-term here. Obviously, we can't use him because of the bye week, but he's an option that is giving you longevity throughout this year. So if you've got him right now, hold on to him. This is a guy that I would feel comfortable streaming over a lot of options. At the very least, he's a low-end tight end 1 moving forward that we can, in fact, trust. Jumping back and taking some questions now. Perfect on the on the tight end trend right here. From Fernando, I have Pitts, picked up Taysom last week, but also picked up Disley for my buys. Who to keep? Perfect. This is a perfectly timed question. Yeah, it would be Taysom and Disley that I would be keeping. Honestly, I know it feels uncomfortable, and you can make the argument for Taysom a lot easier. It's probably Disley that feels a little bit more comfortable, and now you have to have him, because of the bye week, and you're trying to make it work here. But when you're looking at Will Disley and the role that he has carved out within this offense, we love what Jim Harbaugh is doing overall. It took them some time to find that identity, right? This is a new team with lots of young, unproven receivers, right? Unproven pass catchers as well, including Disley in there. The running backs new to the team as well. So this is a situation where the offense really just had to find itself and begin to gel. And they're doing so at a very impressive rate here to where they look like a true contender moving forward. And Disley has emerged as that clear tight end 1 for a top 5 potential quarterback in Justin Herbert. So yeah, when I'm looking at the guys that I feel have volume, have upside, between him, Pitts, and Taysom Hill, the 2 that I trust are Taysom and Disley. Pitts has occasional upside for sure, but when we're looking at him as a player who has, boom upside, but in order to get boom upside from him that you can't actually predict, you have to, at the same time, sit there and on a week-to-week basis, take the zeros that he is, the 0 or 2 points that he is going to get you on a weekly basis. I can't justify it. I have no Kyle Pitts shares, but if I did, it certainly he wouldn't be in my lineup, unfortunately. So yeah, I would drop Kyle Pitts, as uncomfortable as that feels, and I would roll with Taysom and Disley. And it may feel gross to do so, but that is the best move for you from a fantasy perspective moving forward. Oh, from Jelly of the Month, 8-3, half PPR. Nice. Congratulations. Your RB4/5 is Pacheco. Trade Pacheco and Hockenson for McBride. That team's RB2 is the team that you're trading with, their RB2 is Charbonnet after Jordan Mason. It became irrelevant there. They're desperate. You need to get, I would get McBride and something else, to be quite frank. I think that's a lot to trade for, because McBride is definitely a clear step up from TJ Hockenson for sure. Right now, granted, I do think that as we kind of move forward, I was disappointed by Hockenson's performance last week. I did expect better, not going to lie there. Especially coming off of a solid volume game the week before. It was just kind of weird to see that volatility, but you do have to remember they do have a lot. They have a lot of talent in that offense. So from a pass catcher perspective, so inconsistency, unfortunately, might be the name of the game, especially with the fact that Sam Darnold is looking a little questionable, right? So when we're looking at this, sorry, I'm getting mildly distracted. My brother here is texting me, and my brother should know. My brother should know that I'm live right now. Doesn't he have my notifications on? We're gonna have to chastise my brother Jay. Shout out to him. Negative shout out to him. We'll chastise him as a group after the show. That's funny. I'm gonna clip this for him to see. But going back to the question about trading Pacheco and Hockenson for McBride, it just feels like a lot, because when Pacheco is active, you're giving them, the other team, a clear RB1. For you to get back McBride is fantastic. But again, remember, I just talked about the average points. Now, granted, in PPR, assuming if you're playing PPR, or no, you're half PPR, you said. So the statistics that I provided earlier when talking about Taysom Hill, that applies right here. So the average points per game that Trey McBride is having at 10-ish, a little bit over 10, is just not enough to justify giving up Isaiah Pacheco. So you're right to want to upgrade to McBride, but that is a lot. Quite frankly, I would have to have something additional for that because Pacheco's value is a lot higher, in my opinion. Yes, there is a possibility that, he may share space with Kareem Hunt moving forward, but at the same time, we know what Pacheco can be in that offense. So yeah, you've got the right mindset, but I think you're selling you're giving a little too much there, a little too much. DeVonta Smith is droppable. Change my mind. It depends on your league. It depends on your league. If he is not, you don't feel comfortable with him, if it's a shallow league and you don't feel comfortable with him in your starting lineup and he's just going to sit on the bench, and at no point, given the short amount of time that we have remaining, you kind of wonder how much time is there left for you to truly feel comfortable. Yeah, he could be droppable. Now, granted, because of the upside that he has, I can't do that. At the very least, he would be wanting to sit on my bench in a 12-man league, just because of the fact that if A.J. Brown went down, you're talking about an instant wide receiver one, right? Now, granted, it might not exactly play out like that as we kind of seen in the past because of, Saquon Barkley and the volume that he has. But at the same time, the possibility is there. I can't drop him. Is he permanently on a bench? Yeah, I can justify that for sure. But in a 12-team league, I can't make that move. Tight end question, Cade Otton or TJ Hockenson rest of season. So we got Mike Evans potentially coming back this week. Cross our fingers on that one. That said, he would still be the secondary option in that offense. So I do have Cade Otton still slightly higher than TJ Hockenson rest of season. Again, just because I don't mind the schedule moving forward. Baker Mayfield, literal dog, right? He's going to get it done. So even second fiddle behind Mike Evans, I still prefer Cade Otton rest of season. Again, it's just Sam Darnold, and unfortunately, I'm just not trusting him moving forward. So that plays a decent role in it. Deeper question here from Terrell, Ameer Abdullah or Gus Edwards half PPR. And this is interesting because we've got injuries to potentially deal with that could make Ameer Abdullah higher fantasy relevancy there. So if Ameer Abdullah is announced as the guy that is going to be carrying the majority of the workload, I would, in fact, start Ameer Abdullah. Somebody has to tell me that first. I need to hear that from Antonio Pierce. So if I hear that from Antonio Pierce, I 100% would start him before, especially considering the matchup that Gus Edwards has not favorable from a run perspective there for him. So in knowing the lack of upside that he has on the ground, with the lack of receiving upside and the lack of touchdown opportunities as well, this just doesn't bode for a high upside potential matchup for Gus Edwards. There would have to be a situation where they routinely get down inside the 5 and they run Gus Edwards. But as we kind of saw last week, where they where I don't know if you were watching, there was this weird moment where they were at the goal line and they ran Hassan Haskins multiple times at the goal line before they finally gave in and turned to J.K. Dobbins. So it's easy to think that Gus Edwards would theoretically have the goal line opportunities there. That's not the case. They still love J.K. Dobbins and think he's very capable at the goal line. And he's done well when given the opportunity there. So Edwards' upside it's not super high in my opinion. So it would be Abdullah that I would likely start. Oh, good question here. Flex Bucky Irving or Calvin Ridley full PPR. Now, full PPR does make a significant difference there, right? Because full PPR does favor Bucky Irving because of that receiving upside that he has as well. That said, I do lean towards Calvin Ridley. Now, granted, he is apparently dealing with illness, so that's kind of something to watch there. But Ridley is still the guy that I would lean towards. Last week's performance was disappointing, right? But it's kind of not shocking that they weren't able to, utilize Ridley well in that matchup against Minnesota. Prior to that, volume has been very solid, even with Will Levis. I like this matchup against Houston. Defense did look a little bit better last week, obviously, but that's still a very exploitable defense. So I expect this to be a nice bounce back week for Calvin Ridley. Monitor the illness. I don't think that's a big deal, but Ridley is the one that I would start. Since the Debo illness, we do have to kind of monitor every single illness, right? More tight end questions here. I'll do this one real quick before I talk about additional tight ends. Should I trade TJ Hockenson and Brian Thomas Jr. for Mike Evans? I already have Otton. Yes, 100%. I don't care that you already have Otton. You're winning on that trade, for sure. I love Brian Thomas with all my soul. I'm skeptical of, if you have this trade opportunity, waiting for confirmation of Trevor Lawrence coming back. If Trevor Lawrence is back and healthy, then yeah, I can roll with Brian Thomas Jr. rest of season and trust him for sure. And Hockenson is a fine start at tight end 1. But if we're faced with the reality of Mac Jones rest of season, good God have mercy. It's a sad situation there in Jacksonville. So we need Trevor back. I would go ahead and hedge and just take the opportunity, knowing that Mike Evans and that connection that he has with Baker Mayfield is just beautiful, right? Yes, it's risky, wide receiver off of a hamstring injury. I'm willing to take that risk on Mike Evans for sure. One more question here. Tight end question. LaPorta, Otton, or Jonnu Smith. Okay, this is perfect here because I do want to talk about Jonnu Smith specifically here in a second. But when we're looking at LaPorta versus Otton versus Jonnu Smith, I do not trust LaPorta, and it's not even injury related because obviously it sounds like he is going to be able to come back from the injury just this week. That's wonderful. That said, I struggle to get there with trusting LaPorta and the lack of upside that he has, even in a good matchup with Indianapolis. He still is further behind, much further behind Cade Otton, and a little bit further behind Jonnu Smith right now for me. Cade Otton for me, despite the underwhelming performance last time we saw him prior to the bye, is still a tight end 6 for me. Matchup is okay here with the Giants. They do have a little bit of turmoil going on there, right? But he's still the far safer option. But the one that I would play next, obviously, Jonnu Smith is the one that I want to talk about here. Jonnu Smith making his way into very strong flex consideration. He is a borderline tight end 1 right now. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how much we can trust him. Because he's coming into his own, right? We kind of look at that early season usage of him and put it to the side, right? Because they were trying to really identify his role within this offense. And then we had the time period without Tua, which made things difficult. And he still thrived in it, but it was still that volatility, right? But when we're looking at Jonnu Smith, he is exactly what Mike McDaniel has been looking for. Miami has kind of gone through the ringer in trying to find a tight end that consistently can fill exactly what he wants in that role, and Jonnu Smith fits it perfectly. Now, it took us some time to get to this upside, but again, here on any given week, he does offer that low end tight end one potential, and he has genuine overall tight end one upside because of the role that he plays in that offense and the touchdown equity that he has. Touchdowns are the way that he is thriving in fantasy football because the volume isn't super consistent. That said, because the volume isn't super consistent, he does kind of lean favorably towards that touchdown dependent area. And the good thing is, though, we can really identify fairly easily why he is thriving in specific matchups. It's not difficult to figure out. He's succeeding in layup matchups, right? Indianapolis, Las Vegas. He is thriving in layup matchups here. So when you're looking at Jonnu Smith, the times that you want to start him are when he is in layup matchups. So this week against New England, not necessarily a layup, but very streamable options. I think he can thrive this week. LaPorta is obviously somebody who just doesn't have that upside. So I would play a Jonnu Smith again over him. Cade Otton is the one that I feel more stable with, answering that one question. But overall, if anyone is looking for a streaming option and they want to turn to Jonnu Smith, this is an interesting opportunity for him against New England, and I would risk it and roll him out this week. So that's another one there that we can turn to and be very, very interesting. Let's see. Take some more questions here live. Trade away Gibbs, Jacobs, and Dell for Saquon, Garrett Wilson, and Amari. Your running backs are Achane and Gibbs, and your flex is Jacobs. So you would be replacing Gibbs with Saquon and flexing Wilson instead of Jacobs. I think that's a very reasonable trade. Amari is feels like a throw-in, kind of depth, right? But, same deal with him compared to Tank Dell. Tank Dell, not incredibly consistent, right? We've also got Nico Collins that should, in theory, once him and CJ Stroud get back on the same page, hopefully have a lot higher upside moving forward here. So that's kind of a wash for me. So yes, you're going Gibbs, Jacobs, and then Saquon and Wilson. The upgrade, and I love Gibbs, but you get a strong running back. You get a strong wide receiver in return, so you're upgrading there over Dell. So yeah, I don't mind making that trade. I think it's fairly even. And if you're looking to just make that the overall kill to get that overall RB1 upside, Saquon is your guy for that. So I'm okay with you making that trade. I like it. Steelers D or Chiefs defense this week. Steelers D or Chiefs defense this week. It's Steelers defense for me. Against Cleveland, I am willing to take the risk on that Jameis obviously can put up volume, but at the same time give a pick six opportunity. So Cleveland is a fine matchup for them. Pittsburgh is my overall second defense this week. Yeah, my overall second defense this week. Kansas City is a couple spots behind just because Bryce Young has been fairly I don't want to say mistake-free, but prone to not making mistakes. I don't know. There's a better way to phrase that. But he's been not making as many mistakes as he has before, right? There was that one interception that he had that went through Xavier Legette's hand that was zero fault of Bryce Young there. So he feels more stable. So while Kansas City's defense is obviously still a top 5 play, I just think the turnover potential to really push the Steelers to the top of the board there is a lot higher with Cleveland, thanks to Jameis Winston. So that's the direction that I would go. Chef just got some pizza and root beer. Nice. I'm hungry. Yeah, this show is not going to go much longer. We got like maybe 20 more minutes here because I haven't eaten. Let me explain to you guys what I have eaten today. I have eaten. This is embarrassing, the stuff that I've eaten today. So breakfast was a Greek yogurt. That's not embarrassing, but with a box of wheat thins. And when I say a box, like I mean like 99% of the box. So it's almost gone. Then lunch, I had a cup of noodles. Ramen, but just like the cup of noodles, right? And then that was it. I was hungry and I had, what did I have? Some kind of like, I think I had another yogurt, and that's the extent of food that I have eaten today. So I've not had dinner. It's after 6 p.m. I'm extremely hungry. So hearing about your pizza chef and the username chef, you have triggered my stomach to end the show in about 20 minutes. I'm joking. It's not you. I was going to do that anyway because I'm hungry. And there is Wendy's waiting for me, I believe. I'm such a healthy person. Flex Jonnu or Tillman. I would flex Tillman. Last week was not the high upside that we were hoping for. Jerry Jeudy. Now, granted, I just think that might have been a matchup that bodes very well for Jerry Jeudy. It's been so good to see him really come into his own, though. Escape Denver. And because I was skeptical, right? I've got Jerry Jeudy in a dynasty league, and I feel like I've been stuck with him in misery for a while now. So to see him step up in just a different situation and kind of come into his own on a more consistent basis, yeah. But at the end of the day, I do still feel like Cedric Tillman has the higher upside there, the more consistent option. I would definitely play Tillman over Jonnu. Otton or Kelsey this week? I would go with Kelsey. Possible trade targets for Ceedee. That's a tough one. When I'm looking at possible trade targets for Ceedee, the problem here is that you're going to have to pivot to another position. So if you're looking for a running back, right, you might want to look for somebody who maybe like a Brian Robinson would be an interesting one. He's got good matchups coming up. I like this matchup against Dallas. Maybe a Jonathan Taylor you could buy on the low if someone's feeling skeptical at the production that he had with Anthony Richardson back. I still think that he's a low-end RB1, so maybe that's the direction that you could go. But it really is difficult to kind of say just because it's one of those situations where you have to find whoever is willing to believe in Ceedee Lamb. Now, granted, you're coming off the good game, so it's easier to kind of try and sell that. From Jeff Rogers, Sutton or Ridley? I do have Sutton higher. So Sutton is the guy that I would go with. Ridley does have the higher upside in my opinion. But again, while last week was okay, it didn't send any panic for me. I just trust Sutton in the consistency that he's had with Bo Nix recently. And I do love the matchup. Do we think Cousins is going to have a good finish to the year, or do they move on to Penix rest of season? I think Cousins will be fine rest of year. I don't think they're going to move on to Penix. It is a weird situation for Atlanta because they're in a tough spot. Not a tough spot, but a very unclear spot, right? Where they've got some work to do to try and make it to the playoffs. Now, granted, they're not out of it, right? In terms of them being not locked in, right? But they're in the hunt. Theoretically, they're in the playoffs right now. Things should pan out for them. They should make the playoffs. They have no reason to. They have no reason to not push forward with Kirk Cousins. So I don't think that we're going to see Penix anytime soon. It would take a significant downturn for them to be completely out of it, particularly because the NFC is just so flat in the way that their standings are, to the point where teams like Chicago and New Orleans technically are still in it. Like they could still push for some of those final spots there. So yeah, I don't think we see Penix rest of season. I think it's Kirk all the way. Flex, Bucky, Ramondre, Jennings, or Johnston? It's Jennings. Jennings is the guy that I would flex over the rest of the guys. Love the role that he is taking on in replacing Brandon Ayuk, essentially. He's really transitioning well, serving as a target leader. He looks fantastic. And the main thing is, well, Debo does not look like himself. That's really the real kicker, and kind of feeling that comfort in the consistency and reliability for Jauan Jennings rest of the season. I kind of feel, now granted, there's still some time for Debo to find himself through the remainder of the season. But if you kind of look at Debo and the way that he has performed historically, he has good year, bad year, good year, bad year, right? And he, and to his credit, he admits when it was a bad year. He doesn't kind of gaslight. When he had that bad year in 2022, he came out in 2023 and said, it was me. I wasn't in good shape. I'm embarrassed of the output that I had. That won't happen again. I kind of feel like he's, in that situation again, where he had a good 2023 and now he's coming to the season and he's dealing with nagging injuries. But at the end of the day, he also doesn't quite look great, in my opinion, beyond the injuries. So I'm not feeling super confident in Debo moving forward. Jauan Jennings is a guy that I think remains the target hog within that offense. So yeah, we're leaning into Jauan Jennings. Bucks defense or Vikings defense? Lots of defensive questions today. Bucks defense or Vikings defense? I lean towards the Vikings defense. Now, granted, it is appealing, the potential of turnovers from Tommy DeVito, but just from an overall performance standing point, Minnesota's defense has just been genuinely more reliable. Right. It's good to have a streaming option this week, like the Bucks, in that good matchup if you have to turn to it. But if you've got the Vikings defense, I think you just stick with them. What should I do with Jordan Mason and Brian Thomas? Jordan Mason, I would try and trade to the CMC owner, right? And see if he wants to take the handcuff there. CMC, the clear lead back. You would think that in theory they would try and, keep some volume on Jordan Mason, but he's also been dealing with injuries. They seem, for some reason, to be okay with putting that aggressive volume on Christian McCaffrey. And part of that maybe feels like the reasoning is that they're in a position where they're going to have to fight to make the playoffs. They're not in right now. They have to make that push. They're in a tough spot, and they have to have their best players out on the field producing at a high level. So they're giving the volume to Christian McCaffrey, hoping that that can be the uptick to kind of push them over that edge. So Mason is nothing more than a handcuff at this point, and Brian Thomas is in an ugly spot with Mac Jones. Now, granted, you can maybe dangle out the possibility of Trevor Lawrence coming back in order to sell Brian Thomas Jr. for a decent value. But right now, Mason only has one specific trade target, the Christian McCaffrey owner. Otherwise, he's got to stay on your bench, or you can drop him if necessary, because there are some potential options out there on waivers that are better. Roschon Johnson is one that if he's out there on waivers, I might want to roster Roschon Johnson. If I need usable assets now, might want to roster him over Jordan Mason. Because Swift obviously, popped up with a little injury. And then we've also seen that he does have that goal line role as well. Cam Akers is another one. I know what you're saying, Cam Akers. He has not looked good. Let's make no mistake about that. But he has, shown himself to be the clear handcuff of Aaron Jones. And the other aspect to that is Aaron Jones has not looked good. I feel like the Vikings, and I actually just, I'm writing about this right now. The Vikings right now it feels like they're trying to play, trying to mitigate the issues of what they already did with Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones has never been a high volume running back. He's always operated in some level of a pseudo committee, even if you don't view it as a traditional committee, right? With AJ Dillon, he had always had someone taking additional workload. He never been a extremely high volume guy on the ground. His additional touches always came through the air. In contrast, the Vikings have aggressively used him on the ground earlier in the season, significant usage on the ground, which is a very peculiar approach. Like, it's making me question, like, what were you thinking would happen in terms of wearing down on a 29-year-old running back who has a history of never being a full workhorse running back, and you're out there running him like he's Josh Jacobs. Can you think that through? And he's a smaller back as well. Like, theoretically, that might have been an issue. So I think kind of what we're seeing right now with them pushing carries towards Cam Akers and the lack of efficiency from Aaron Jones is the result of Jones dealing with injuries and just being worn down from way too aggressive a workload, unfortunately. So I think we're going to continue to see there be a little bit of limitation on Aaron Jones and an uptick in volume for Cam Akers. So if you're looking for kind of a usable asset and saying, I can't get any kind of usage out of a Jordan Mason unless unless Christian McCaffrey gets injured, he offers no standalone value. You've got guys like that, like I was saying, with Roschon and Cam Akers that do offer some standalone value here. So just kind of, keep your mind on that. If you need somebody in this bye week fill-in that you have to be able to put on the field and know that they are going to get touches this week. Those are two. By the way, if I missed your questions, feel free to ask it again because unfortunately I'm looking at multiple screens here. Herbert or Mayfield this week. Justin Herbert for me is ranked higher, and I've been struggling with ranking Justin Herbert because I quite frankly want to move Justin Herbert up to my QB2 this week. But it's so tough because Kyler's in a good matchup and Lamar Jackson is Lamar Jackson. And then we also got Bo Nix. But right now, Herbert is my QB4. And I'm so conflicted about it because I love this matchup and potential for him this week against Baltimore. Especially for Baltimore coming off of that horribly underwhelming performance last week. I feel like this is the perfect opportunity for them to have a good get-right game of pushing volume. Even though the Chargers defense has been strong this year, they have been vulnerable to volume, particularly by quarterbacks and two receivers. So despite the fact that, the Chargers are a good defensive team, we should get a good back and forth here, some offensive firepower flowing. I anticipate a good back and forth between Herbert and Lamar Jackson. So Justin Herbert is a guy that has top 5 upside for me this week. While I do love me some Baker Mayfield, and he should get the return here of Mike Evans, we do also have to consider that this is a weird matchup with the Giants. The Giants defense it's not been that bad this season. The Giants defense is not the one that's selling them. It's been the offense. The defense has been solid. At the same time, we could get into a weird situation where if there is just a stupid amount of Tommy DeVito turnovers, right? Maybe they jump out aggressively on the Giants and they keep Mike Evans somewhat limited, right? Because they don't have to heavily utilize him because they're dominating the game. And then, Baker Mayfield is just kind of dumping the ball off to, Bucky Irving and Rashad White, and maybe they pull him. Like, it's possible, right? So there's a scenario where this matchup doesn't bode well from a fantasy upside perspective for Baker Mayfield, for the longevity of him playing in the game and having, Mike Evans in the game. The upside is just a lot higher for Justin Herbert. Winston or Levis? God, that's a good question. I do have Jameis Winston ranked 2 spots higher. I don't hate what I've seen out of Levis coming off of his injury there. And this matchup against Pittsburgh is very peculiar. Again, this is another divisional matchup that could be a lot lower scoring game here. I do expect a little bounce back week for Russell Wilson, but it is just a very weird matchup. So be cautious on this one. But Jameis Winston, I do have higher than Will Levis. Kyler or Goff? Have Connor and McBride in your lineup here. It's okay. In my opinion, especially in a particularly good matchup in Seattle, is a good matchup to have, overload on one particular team. So having Kyler, Connor, and McBride aligned in that matchup is not a bad position to go to. So Kyler is the guy that I do have ranked higher. I would start Kyler. Flex Pollard or Tillman, concerned about the weather for Thursday's game. Yeah, I get that for sure. 100%. At the same time, Tony Pollard, now granted, and I hate this because you might have to, that's tough, because you might have to make that choice before we get the information on the Tajay Spears concussion. So this is a nuanced answer. And unfortunately, you might be forced to go with Pollard or to go with Tillman, even though you are concerned about the weather. So Tony Pollard, has been had his workload reduced significantly over the past 2 weeks with Tyjae Spears returning. So Pollard, and we did kind of get a tip off there that the Titans did want to reduce workload. I might have been a little delusional about that. So, that's on me too. I thought that they were, limiting him a little bit, but taking him down to 9 carries in each game, that's ridiculous. Unfortunately, I didn't expect it to be that low, but they've dropped him down to the point where from a fantasy perspective, you can't trust him and it's not usable. That said, Tyjae Spears is in concussion protocol. We're probably not going to know before the Thursday night game. So you kind of have to take a risk there and say, do I think, check out the news, monitor the news. If it sounds like Tyjae Spears is going to remain in concussion protocol and be out, if we can get a tip off on that early, then yeah, I would hold off on Tillman and go ahead and start Pollard. If you don't have that information, then yeah, you might have to go ahead and start Tillman. So I hate giving you kind of that answer right there because that doesn't give you a definitive answer. My preference would be a Tony Pollard play with no Tyjae Spears, but we might not have that information. So you might have to go with Tillman because if Tyjae Spears is active, I do not believe that Pollard will make double-digit fantasy points. I don't. And I hate that for him, but that's just the name of the game in terms of how it feels like they're utilizing him. Trade DK for Tyreek Hill. That's a fairly even trade, and I am okay with that. Now, some of that may bode down to rest of season, and from memory, rest of season would favor. It should favor. No. They both have terrible rest of seasons, to be honest. Neither one of them have a very positive rest of season outlook there. I do think that Tyreek offers the higher upside for sure, and we are seeing the push of JSN really trying to come through on there. So I can still make that trade, even though I really do not like Miami's rest of season schedule for Tua. Yeah, especially the fact that they're I struggle. Will you be able to trust him in championship week at Cleveland? Probably not. It's just going to potentially be an ugly playoff schedule here. Has San Francisco in the playoff schedule as well. So yeah, it's not a friendly end for them, but at least Tyreek has more of the volume on his side. So I do lean that direction towards Tyreek for sure. Thoughts on Hunter Henry rest of season? Perfect. That is another tight end. You guys are making it easy for me. That's another tight end that I wanted to talk about on this live here. Hunter Henry in New England. Hunter Henry is actually a very intriguing streaming option this week because he's the clear tight end 1, right? But Austin Hooper is just being mildly annoying, right? He's not good from a fantasy perspective, but he just pushes in a little bit enough to kind of take the top off, right? But when we're looking at Hunter Henry statistics, I like to look at Hunter Henry statistics and kind of just eliminate the portion with Jacoby Brissett because it's not realistic for us to judge Hunter Henry based off the way that he was with Jacoby Brissett. And we just need to look at him with Drake May moving forward. We know that Drake May, started in week 6. And since then, he's been tight end 12. He's been very streamable. It's not a lot of production. It's 8.7 fantasy points in half PPR. But again, that goes back to what I said, that low end tight end 1, borderline tight end 1 is literally producing in that 7 to 9. Excuse me, that's 7 to 9 coughing again. That's 7 to 9 fantasy point range. Hunter Henry is well entrenched within there. He's a weekly streaming option who, again, you just got to look for those good matchups for him to where he can have a little bit of upside here. So again, Hunter Henry, very streamable option on a weekly basis. Rest of season, we are looking at the schedule to try and figure out what type of volatility he has and how much we can trust him moving forward. So the Patriots rest of season schedule does unfortunately include a bye week. So that sucks from that perspective. But when you're looking at it, there are some interesting matchups here. We've got Indianapolis coming up. Miami is not a terrible matchup as well. So he's streamable this week, streamable next week. But then the bye week, unfortunately after that, I do not feel confident in him. You got Arizona, not an excellent matchup. Buffalo, not an excellent matchup. LA Chargers, not an excellent matchup. You got to remember that Arizona's defense has been changing over the course of the season as well. So Hunter Henry rest of season, I do push him a little bit further back. If you need a streaming option now, perfect fill in this week, next week as well, but you got to ditch him after the bye week. So rest of season is not long-term for you. You're ditching him once you get to the bye week. Let's answer some more questions before we close things out. Jalen Waddle, Pittman, Chase, Shakir, and Williams need to drop one in order to bring Mike Evans off of IR. This is a conundrum, right? So right off the bat, we know, obviously, not Chase, obviously, not Jameson Williams. You're looking at Shakir, Pittman, and Waddle. Name brand says Shakir is the one that you drop. But I don't think that's the case here. I think you need to hold on to Shakir. He has been one of the more reliable, one of the more steady options. He ultimately doesn't have that theoretical high ceiling of Waddle, but we haven't seen that from Waddle. So I would roster Khalil Shakir over Jalen Waddle. It's between Waddle and Pittman. I lean towards dropping Pittman, and I hate to say that just because I feel like Pittman dropping off to waivers, if you need to go back and I think he'll stay there. And if you need to go back and get him, more than likely you would be able to go and pick him up. But with the depth that you have, Pittman is probably the guy that you want to drop. Keep Waddle on your bench for that upside that he has, that theoretical upside, right? And then the others you feel more comfortable keeping. A few more questions here. Play 2, Hopkins, Debo, Elijah Moore. You're challenging me on that one because Debo is somebody who I talked about earlier, I'm concerned about rest of season, right? And Hopkins is another one who I'm starting to wonder, is that boom game that we saw, that 2-touchdown game that we saw with him and Patrick Mahomes, was that just an anomaly, right? Was that just a one-hit wonder? He disappeared, understandably so, against Denver. We excuse that. But then last week, disappearing and Xavier Worthy stepping up as the guy that looked like he was the true wide receiver one in that offense, it does make you a little bit concerned there. That said, I do like the matchup for him. I'm willing to take the risk on Hopkins. And Debo is another one that, again, while I don't feel super comfortable, not feeling super confident, the matchup is interesting because I feel like this is a good situation where he could have production on the ground. Green Bay, obviously, a tough defensive matchup often against wide receivers. But if they utilize him on the ground, defensively, Green Bay has been very vulnerable on the ground. So maybe he can finally take advantage of that rushing upside because he's been getting the carries. He just hasn't been producing touchdowns with those. So I feel like this is a game where I do want to lean into the risk of both Hopkins and Debo. Couple more questions here. Jaylen Warren or Roschon Johnson for RB2. I think I talked earlier. DeAndre Swift dealing with an injury. We monitor that. If he is in fact out, Roschon is the guy that I would go with. Now, granted, if he's just kind of still dealing with the injury and questionable and kind of a game time decision, then in that instance, re-injury risk obviously pops up. Maybe limited usage becomes an issue as well. And Roschon is still the one that I would play. So I would have to have a healthy DeAndre Swift announced in order for me to not play Roschon Johnson over Jaylen Warren. You're my twin this week because I will be playing Roschon Johnson as my RB2 as well. So hopefully we benefit on that one together. Ramondre Stevenson or Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is one that has concerned me. Now he's practicing in full. He is beat up. I do have Ramondre Stevenson higher. Chicago is not a bad matchup, but Stevenson is just more trustworthy in terms of the volume and his ability to be productive with it. So I do have Stevenson ranked higher this week. Let's see, checking to see if I miss any more YouTube questions. I don't think so. So I think we are good to go. And let's take a few more questions over here. DeAndre Swift, Tyrone Tracy Jr. or Javonte. I'm not buying into the Javonte resurgence. I do not trust Sean Payton. I'm well documented on that one, which is odd because I've talked well about Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton, but I don't trust him with the running backs. Let me specify that. I feel confident in the pass game. don't trust him with the running backs there. So DeVonta, now you're out. Between DeAndre Swift and Tyrone Tracy, I would take the risk with Tyrone Tracy, even with the whole weird quarterback situation, and go with Tyrone Tracy. One more question. Drop Jalen Waddle or Keenan Allen? I would drop Keenan Allen. He's probably the safer option in terms of production, but at the same time, he has zero upside, unfortunately. Love you, Keenan Allen, but he's the one that I would say goodbye to. All right, guys, I am going to close things out. A few questions though, or a few requests though. As a reminder, please be sure to subscribe. This is a podcast, by the way, so please be sure to subscribe to the Dear Miss Fantasy Show on all platforms if you're not already subscribed, and subscribe to Player Profiler as well on the podcast and on YouTube. And of course, if you're in for more subscriptions, you can and follows, you can subscribe and follow to me at It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere. And apparently, what is that? Blue Sky as well. I just went ahead and got one of those, so it's whatever. If it's their social media, I'm branded on the same place everywhere. So there we go. All right. I appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you so much. Your questions were amazing. Gonna go off and eat dinner now. Hopefully it is very delicious. And thank you so much, guys. I hope you have a wonderful week. If you have any questions, by the way, feel free to tag me on social. Twitter is the best place to do so. Tag me and I'll answer. But good luck, guys. Good luck with your lineups this week. I hope you win. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you all.